Hey, hello everyone. This is Diane Pennington. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. It's just after 2 o'clock my time here, so oh, Vanessa, you don't hear anything? Do you maybe have your speakers on mute, something like that? Oh, I guess you can't hear me, can she? We just had another person join here, Dr. Glenn. Make sure that everyone can hear me while Vanessa checks her speakers. And I'm really happy to see that one of my current students joined us today. Is everybody else here from Ashford, or are you faculty, are you students? Could you just let me know briefly where you're coming from so that I know who I'm speaking with, please? Hi, Mandy. Okay, I think yeah, I see some familiar names in here as well. I really appreciate those of you who have come to more than one of our presentations, and really appreciate if you could help continue to market these talks to students. Are we having a pet conference? No, but that would be a lot of fun today. These are our dogs, Athena the Basset Hound, or Tina the Basset Hound as we call her, and Sophie the Chihuahua. And they are our two, well, Athena is my stepchild and Sophie is my daughter. And we just got married last year, so we now have a blended family. And I can't tell you how interesting it is to have a Basset and a Chihuahua in the same house. So they like to appear on my first slide whenever I give talks, and Mandy's probably seen them in my announcements before. So they're always with me when I do some presentations or some teaching. Vanessa, can you hear us now? Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started then with the content, now that it seems like we're all hooked up and on board. The topic of today's session is assembling and engaging literature reviews. And I added incorrect APA format because this is a session on APA, but APA does provide some specific guidelines for how literature reviews should be conducted. And additionally, I also have a lot of information from other sources about how to put together literature reviews that are interesting and useful and sort of bring a topic together in different types of papers. And if we have some time at the end, I hope to have some time for some discussion, as well as a couple of examples that I will try to pull up here on the screen, assuming the technology allows me to do so, from some of my recent journal articles, just so that we can look at how literature reviews can be constructed in hopefully ways that are meaningful to our readers, because that's the most important thing. So annotated bibliography, absolutely. That's a whole other area, a different type of literature review, and we can touch on that a little bit as well. So if we want to identify the definition of a literature review in general, I've pulled heavily from this Justin book that I have a citation at the end. It's called Doing Your Literature Review, Traditional and Systematic Techniques. And they cover different types of literature reviews in their books. Most of them will be focusing on the traditional method today in this talk, just because of time constraints. But this book is really great for looking at different types of reviews. So if we think about just the general definition of a literature review, according to this book, and I really like this definition, is a written appraisal of what is already known, existing knowledge on a topic with no prescribed methodology. So the idea is that we go through and find things that have already been written on our topic, and when we put our papers together, we try to assemble all of these different pieces of knowledge together to create some sort of support or some argument for our topic at hand. And three different features that they give to literature reviews in general is it's thoughtful and interpretive, it's used to find knowledge gaps, and is tied to your research questions. Now, Mandy is a current student in my research methods, but business research methods and tools course in BOS 642 at Ashford. And one of the things that they have to do is at the end is write an original research paper, which is a big, big task. But one of the things that is part of doing original research is writing up literature that has already been done on your topic that you're studying. And this is something that can support research questions. So whatever question you're trying to answer, you need to look at what's already been studied and then design your research to build on what's already been found. If you have a new topic that nobody's ever studied before, that's the idea of doing original research, is to do research that has not been done by anyone before, at least in the way that you're presenting it. But you can find out what already has been done, so it can help you find areas that you can identify to do new research on, to answer questions and do experiments and studies in ways that have never been done before. But the first step in doing that is to do a literature review so that you already know what's out there. So the two different general types of literature reviews that has been identified in this book is the traditional and the systematic literature review. And the traditional literature review is what most of us think of when we are writing a paper. And but what's really important to remember when you're doing this kind of literature review is that you really need to put together your own critical thoughts about the topic. And so this is very different from just saying, well, here's what this person did, and here's what this person did, and here's what this person did. You want to actually create sort of a picture of what's been done in this topic and add your own thoughts in. And when you look at the different sides of research, you might have find some research that might conflict with each other, that might support each other, that might be associated. So you want to kind of put all those different views together. And you can either do this in a very biased sort of way almost, to only, you can actually just only cite literature that supports what you believe, your hypothesis, which I don't necessarily recommend, but you see it done, or as well as just giving an overall picture of the areas that have been looked at. And it is absolutely true, as we're seeing here in chat, that literature review should connect to the theoretical framework as well as the research questions, and then eventually inform your methodology and your research design. So that's the traditional literature review. This is the kind of thing that we tend to think of whenever we have to give an assignment in class to write a paper on something. This is sort of what we're doing. Frequently what we see less often is that students don't put as much of their own thoughts and their own arguments into it as we would like to see sometimes. So if there's a few students in here, I would really like to see that we do a little bit more of this critical thinking and to read research carefully and constructively rather than just writing down whatever you have written about what's been said. The systematic literature review is more objective than a traditional review, and we see this a lot in areas like health research, more in the hard sciences, less frequently in social science or in business. And so what we see here in systematic reviews is we don't do it as much in our courses, but you do see it a lot in published journal articles. And this is meant to be more neutral, more objective, as I said, and the goal is to find everything as much as possible that's been written on a certain topic or a certain research area. And this is typically used to try to inform practice so that, for example, if you do medical research and you're trying to look at treatments for a specific disease, you might try to find everything that's been written about how to treat this one disease and to help find patterns and new ways to treat the condition. And so these are the two different main types that's discussed in this particular book. So why do we write a literature review? Well, there's a lot of ways we can use these things. If you do research professionally, as you're a professor, you work for some sort of scientific organization, a lot of times you have to write a proposal for your research to get grant, to get funding to do the research. And so a lot of times grant funders will want to see the research that's already been done to make sure that you have well-constructed questions and a good hypothesis, and you have a good direction moving forward in your proposal. And that's an important aspect of deciding whether or not it gets funded. Research projects that you have to do for courses, this might just be you have to do some original research on a certain topic, such as in my research methods course, and so you have to do some background work to see what's already been done in this area. If you're doing a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation, these tend to be very exhaustive because your committee wants you to see that you have found everything possible on your topic. And for those of us who have done it, those of us who have PhDs or have done research-based theses in this group, we know what an exhausting process that can be. Journal articles that present original research is another area where you have to do literature reviews. These tend to be much more focused and more directed towards your particular topic. And so when we see journal articles, we don't see things that go on for quite as long as the thesis might. We just want to see an introduction to the area. And typically, you don't cite everything that you read when you're writing this kind of article. You'll probably read much more than you actually end up using in the end. But it's still good to have all that background knowledge in your mind. Frequently, as we do a lot in courses, we tell you to go write a paper on something. A lot of times we call this research, and it's not research in the same sense that original research is done. But when we talk about doing research, a lot of times this is what students tend to refer to, which is you go pick a topic or you get assigned a topic, and you have to go find stuff that's been written about that topic and write it up for your professor. And a lot of government organizations and businesses do research for developing policy, for developing best practices in their services and their products. And we have to do a lot of research. And professional researchers work all the time for government organizations and corporations and other companies. And so we have to do these things to influence policy or our business practices. So let's talk a little bit about how to find all this literature. The biggest thing that I can tell students to do is to plan ahead. It's really important to not start this work the day before the paper is due. I know that tends to be a human tendency. It's human nature to sometimes wait till the last minute, especially when we're really busy. But the process of searching can take much longer than you might expect because you'll find so many things. You don't really know what direction it's going to go in. It's easy to get off on tangents and find something that's interesting but isn't really related to your paper topic, so you have to refocus yourself and get back on track, and it can take a very long time. And then after you find it, you have to then read it all, which takes even longer for you. So planning ahead is really an important thing to think about when you start your literature search. So when you're actually doing the searching itself and finding the articles, one thing that's important to do is to identify keywords in your topic. And so what you'll do is you'll identify important words in the actual topic itself and think about words that might be related so that you can broaden your search if you're not finding enough information, and you can use different words to mean the same things. And when you're doing searching, a lot of the library databases that we use that are available through your university library use searches that use things called Boolean terms. And what Boolean terms are the words and or not. And this is kind of a counterintuitive way of thinking about the words that we use for searching. But it's really important to understand this because you can maximize your results the best way possible by using these things. If we use the word, if we're searching for cats and we're searching for dogs, let's use this as our example here. And if we say cats, not dogs, so we put the word not there, what the search will do is find everything that's related to cats, but nothing that's related to dogs. So that's a pretty straightforward one. It gets a little confusing when we think about the words and or. If we talk about cats and dogs, what we do is we only want articles that have both cats and dogs in that particular article. So we use that to get more results back. If we say cats or dogs, that means that we only want things that have cats and we only want things that have dogs, but we don't want them together. So this is a little bit counterintuitive way of thinking, as I've said, but if we use these words and and or it's a very powerful way to influence our searches to get the best focused results possible. And just as a little bit of a disclaimer, I am a librarian as well as a business professor, so this is kind of a topic that's near to my heart. I really love searching in the most effective ways possible, so contact me offline if you have more questions about this. This is a new way of thinking, I realize. So when we're trying to find sources for our literature, this is the list that the book that I've been citing provides to us, and we all have access to these things through our universities. Ashford has a growing list of resources that are available to us, and even though it's all online and electronic for those of us who are virtual students and faculty members, we do have access to a lot of these things through the Ashford Library online. So the library catalog is typically what we think of as in traditional terms, the things that the library itself holds. And this applies more to the physical environment when you used to go into a library physically and bring books home and other things. That is what a library catalog tends to consist of. Nowadays, it can also have information about the electronic journals and books that it holds, which is the environment that most of us work in at Ashford. A digital library or an electronic library can mean something a little bit different. It can mean access to things that the library holds individually and uniquely. But digital libraries can pertain to things like special collections that is only held at that library, nowhere else. So, for example, I used to work at a library in Texas that had a very extensive list of sources related to wars that happened in Texas, like Texas-Mexican War and things like that, and that was only held at that library. So Texas, they created a digital library of all these resources that were only available through that library. Individual full-text journal databases are things like EBSCO Host, or EBSCO, I think it's called Academic Source Premier these days, and we can actually do our literature search within that database and click on links to get PDF files of the entire text of a journal article. And this is a great resource because you can do all of your searching and retrieving your articles in one place. Online repositories, universities are creating these to become places where the articles and the books and other scholarly resources that their professors create are available through the university. And so that way, if you have one university that has a lot of researchers, everything in that repository will have been created by professors that work for that university. And bibliographic databases are similar to full-text databases, except for the fact that they don't necessarily have links to the full text. You might have to go to a different database or different location to find them, but they do have all of the bibliographic information for articles and books, which is things like the title, the author, the name of the journal, the name of the book, the page number where the journal article appears, things like that. So these are useful in the similar way that full-text databases are, but hopefully in some libraries they will actually link you to the full-text database within the bibliographic database, but that varies greatly by university and by the type of database that's available. So let's simplify all that a little bit. If you are an Ashford student or faculty member, you have access to Ashford's online library, and they have this interface that's really great that basically searches almost everything that they hold electronically in their library. It's called Find It at AU, and you can type your search words into the search box, and then it will return a lot of things that are related to your search. If you use that advanced search, which is kind of right there under the main search box, you can be more specific in your search, and you can use those words like and or and not and other things that I was talking about. If you want to limit it to certain dates that things were published, or you want to limit to a certain language or a certain format, you can do that kind of thing in the advanced search. But the basic search is kind of like just a Google search for everything that Ashford has access to. Google Scholar is another wonderful resource that I use frequently. And Google Scholar works just like Google, but it only searches scholarly resources, so things like journal articles, textbooks, academic books, other things that professors and researchers have created. So what that does for you, if you're trying to find resources, it gets rid of sort of all that junk out there that is not acceptable to cite in an academic research paper. And Google Scholar does a wonderful job of limiting the kinds of things that are available and focusing your search pretty well. The problem with these kinds of research tools is that sometimes you can get about 100,000 results returned, 1 million results returned, and it's a lot to go through. And that's when some of those more advanced search techniques are useful, because then you can limit it to, I only want to see things that have been published in the last 5 years because you're doing a really current topic and you don't want to know about anything that's older. You can limit it to language, so only things published in English, only things available in peer-reviewed journals. Things like that are really useful when you're using these kinds of search services, especially as you find out how much is out there and you determine what your scope needs to be for your literature search. But it can take a while to get to that point, so there's certainly nothing wrong with starting general and then working down to things that are more focused. So once you've got all this literature, what do you do with it? This is when it can get a little bit overwhelming, because you've found all kinds of interesting articles and things that you want to read. But now you have to read it all. So this is the next step. What I want to emphasize is perfectly permissible and encouraged, and in my class almost required to do as a student, is that you have to tell me what you think of the research that you've read. It's your job to be a critical reader and to look at the research, determine if it's useful, look at the methods, look at how they've done it, and make your own opinions about it without using first person. Thanks, Dr. Swanson. So it's really important for you to feel like you have permission to do that, because I know as a student it can be difficult to give yourself permission to question these people, because they're supposed to be the authorities on this topic. But not all published research is good, and there's a lot of flaws in things, and it's your job to make that decision. So looking at literature to help you get organized, and there's different ways to organize all this stuff. In the past, especially when I was doing my PhD, I tended to print a lot of things, and I wasted a lot of paper and killed a lot of trees, I have to admit. But it was very helpful for me to be able to sort my articles into piles. So I had sort of piles by topic or piles by author or whatever. It was helpful for me that day. You can code it. You can just write the general topic or the area that's covered and, on the first page of the paper, or put it in the file name if you're just saving PDFs to your computer. There's different ways to work with it, but it's much harder, in my opinion, to organize digitally available materials. There's some different ways to look at it, but if you can code it or at least put it into separate folders on your computer, something like that, just to get all that stuff organized. So what you can do to first assess an article and determine if you need further assistance is read the abstract first, so that's what appears on the first page. Read the introduction to the article, so that will tell you sort of what its background is and why they're doing the study. And then skip all the stuff in the middle, go to the last page and read the conclusions, because then that will tell you, hopefully, if it's been well written, what they found and what they think future research might entail, for what is their next step or what should anybody's next step be. And look at the reference list. See who they cited, see if the citations look like they're interesting and relevant to your topic. So if you've done all that and you decide this looks like a really useful thing for me, go back and read the whole thing. And when you do it actively, interact with the article, highlight things that are important, underline things, determine what approach the author is taking and whether or not it's helpful and whether or not you like it. And one thing that I did, especially when I was a beginner at reading original research, is taking notes. Have a notebook next to you or your laptop or whatever way you like to use to take notes. And writing down the points that you read of the article that stand out to you helps you outline what has been written so that you can understand it a little bit better yourself. And then also write your own reflections about the article so that later on, when you're trying to put all this together into a written review, you can remember what was in each article and what you thought of them. And this can help you organize your thoughts a whole lot better. Okay, so you've read it all. Now you have to write it up. So what do we do with this? Keep your notes around, but also keep the originals as well, because sometimes you might read your notes and not remember what you were thinking when you wrote those notes. And remember that when you cite something in an article or in your paper, that implies that you have actually read the article. So don't cite anything that you haven't read yourself. And think about what the purpose is of this literature review. Are you just trying to describe what's been written? Are you providing your own critique, your own evaluation of the literature? Are you just trying to synthesize together a bunch of different ideas? What are you trying to do with all this? What is your bias? What bias do you bring to this? Are you trying to prove a particular idea that you have? Are you testing a hypothesis? Are you only interested maybe in the methods that have been used in these different articles? You don't even really care what they were studying. And we all come to all this research with our own subjectivity as well. I personally don't believe that it's possible to be completely objective when we're doing science, even though that's supposed to be the idea. But we all come in with our own personal ideas about how things should be, and it's based on our past experiences, it's based on our research experience, all these things. And so we have to just be aware of that subjectivity when we're reading research and writing of things. Make sure that the literature is related to your topic. Like I said earlier, it's easier to get taken off in tangents because you find things that are interesting and you get thrown off in different directions. Refocus yourself if you find that's happening because it will take you much longer to get through your work if you do that. As I said, to review them critically, provide your own critiques of them, comparing and contrasting different views, so different approaches to researching the same topic, different conclusions that may support different ideas. Those are all important to include in a literature review if you're trying to cover the entire scope of the topic. And put out those differences when you're writing it, and grouping sources together by saying, well, these people said this, these people said this, and we can do this in ways that doesn't necessarily look like just a grocery list, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. Another reason that it's so important to start so early is that no first draft of anything we ever write is perfect. What I like to do is to write something, come back to it later, go away, do something else for a couple of hours or even overnight, come back to it the next day with a fresh mind, take a look at where things can be improved and do that approval. And the so what question is something that my PhD advisors were just so emphatic on this point, that why are we doing this? Who cares? So what? Why does this matter? And you need to construct your literature review and your arguments in such a way to prove that there is a reason to do this and it is important. So what is just absolutely essential, because what's the point otherwise? So to look at a couple of different written formats that this could take, this is what we call the short summary literature review. And this is taken from an article that was written in one of my areas of research. And what they've done here is they've said there is now a growing body of research suggesting, and then they give it the topic. And as you'll see here, there's a whole bunch of citations. And what they've done here is taken all of the citations that support this one view about socially created metadata and how it can be complementary to traditional knowledge organization systems. So they've read all these articles and realized that that was a common theme among all these different articles. So in this case, they're just making this one point, saying that, you know, here's this area of research, and they use this to further construct their method. And so in this case, they don't have to explain the details of every single study that is listed here. They're just saying all these studies point to this one thing. The standalone review is a little bit different. So if we're just looking at writing a literature review for a class and the professor says, write a paper on this particular topic, it's called a standalone review. And this can also be a sort of a more involved introduction to a topic. In some research papers in some fields, the literature reviews are a little bit more detailed than in others. Psychology, for example, you only see, you know, maybe one page, but in my field in information science, you'll see sometimes a more extensive review of the literature. So first, we introduce the topic. What do we know about it? Just do a quick summary. Let's say customer service is what we're writing a paper on. I only mention that because we use this a lot for discussion in my current research methods course. And so what I suggested here is that after the quick introduction, we have three different themes. And first we start with best practices in customer service. The next area, examples of customer service fail, so what not to do in customer service. And finally, the third theme would be some overview of academic research in customer service. So in this way, it all relates to the initial topic of customer service, but the literature is grouped in three different distinct ways, but they're still related. So after you're introducing the literature that is grouped into these three themes, you can have your own discussion and talk about what you thought about what you read. Provide critiques of what you read, what you thought of the different views, and in the conclusion, what have you contributed by writing this article, and what is needed to find out next, and we call that future research. So we've done our contribution by maybe summarizing the area of customer service in a new way, by putting all these things together, and what is your critique provided to the field, and what are your suggestions from what you found out? What is another area that's a gap in the knowledge that needs to be filled by doing more literature review, more original research, whatever you think needs to happen. So when I talk about what should be done, I always like to talk about what not to do, just from watching What Not to Learn maybe too many times. Here's something that I see frequently. I see all these things frequently in students' papers and in professionally written research that I review. Write a shopping list. And this is what I was talking about earlier. There's no synthesis. They haven't really putting anything together. It's just on the topic of this author said this author said this author said this over and over again. And it doesn't really put anything together in any meaningful way other than here's just a list of things that these authors said. It's important to identify key studies in an area, and these are the ones that you see cited over and over again. So if you read 10 articles on one topic, frequently several of them will cite one or two studies that might be older, but they're sort of foundational material for this topic. It's important to at least acknowledge that you know that those exist, because that demonstrates that you have knowledge of the topic, and this is where the topic rooted from. So you have to prove that you know this, and it's important for your readers to know them too. Not writing sentences in interesting ways or varying ways is also something to keep track of. A lot of times you'll say, author X said this, author Y said this, author this said this, over and over and over again without any variation in how things are written. Another thing that I see frequently, and students, this will also get you in trouble with your Turnitin similarity scores, is to just put in a lot of direct quotes over and over again. Copy and pasting one direct quote after another is something that it shows me that you haven't really taken the time to learn the material yourself. You're just putting in the quotes that you read in the book or in the chapter or in the article, and you haven't really taken the time to put it into your own words, because when you put something into your own words, that really shows that you have thought more about the material. And I don't want to read what those authors said unless they said something in a really brilliant way. I want to read what you have to say about this. And so let's try to avoid too many direct quotes. Oversighting and underciting. This is actually taken from an article of mine that I'll put up here in just a few minutes, I've cited it really. So what we've seen over here, and I see this a lot in students' papers, they're paranoid that they're going to play dry, so they cite over and over again. So in that first bullet point there, I've cited the same study, the same year, and the same authors 3 times, and that's a little bit too much. Sometimes if you put together a thought and you have 2 or 3 sentences that all relate to that same study, you can just cite it at the end of the sentences. You don't have to cite it in every single sentence. Or on the opposite side of things, you see many researchers have noted weaknesses in opaque design, and the statement will be made without any citations. So I read that and I think, well, who are these researchers that have noted these weaknesses? So in this case, you haven't really supported what all of those different researchers, who they are, and how do you know that they've said this? Because you don't have anything to back yourself up. So here's what APA says about literature reuse. And since this is a session on APA, this is important to note. Their guidelines basically mostly relate to manuscripts, and what they mean by that is original research that is, in their context, submitted to journals related to the American Psychological Association. So when they talk about literature reviews for manuscripts, they're talking about original research for the most part, and how literature reviews can support your original research. So what they say is to include relevant but not exhaustive reviews. So that means you don't have to cite, they don't want you to cite every single work that's ever been written on your topic, but make sure that it's relevant and related to the research that you're doing. They advise, as I said, to cite earlier work and other perspectives on the topic. So if there have been opposing views to what you are hypothesizing or things that have been in existence for many years and has been cited by 1,000 papers, make sure to include that as well. Avoid tangents and details, so don't get overly detailed in your discussion about all of the details about how a particular study was done, and don't go off in those tangents that are so tempting. Just stay focused. And as you're focusing, focus mostly on the findings, the methods, and the conclusions that are in the background research that you've done. So you don't need to provide other details, but just focus on those points in these areas that are the most relevant to your work. Bridging the past and the present. So how have you seen through your literature review that the work that's currently being done or more recent research has been informed by research that's been done in the past, and how has that past research led up to where we are now in this research area? And I did use a direct quote here from the APA manual: develop the problem with enough breadth and clarity to make it generally understood by as wide a professional audience as possible. So what you really want to do from APA's point of view is to make sure that a lot of people can read your work, but they also don't expect you to treat your audience as though they're completely unknowledgeable about the topic. So you sort of have to assume there's a certain level of awareness and intelligence in your readers, and make sure that they can understand what you've written, but not to go overboard with too many details or starting from the very beginning, because then your readers are more likely to get bored that way. You have to sort of assume that anybody reading this stuff is going to have some kind of background on this topic. So I cannot talk about APA without talking about APA style citations and references, because I know that this is a big struggle for a lot of our students. Citing the source, as I said earlier, means that you have read it. So if you haven't read it, please don't cite it. Make sure that you cited it to see for yourself that what you cited is actually in the paper. Don't take somebody else's interpretation at their word, because they may have been wrong. Authors of literature review typically exist a more exhaustive list of citations, and this is especially true if you're giving just an article that's entirely literature review, that there's no original research component to it, but just an overall literature review. Or also if there's any annotated bibliography, as we mentioned at the beginning, as somebody else mentioned, annotated bibliography. And so what you do with those is you make a list of citations to articles and books that are relevant to this topic, and then you provide a few sentences of summary about what was important in those articles, and there's different ways to do that. But that's going to be a pretty exhaustive list too. Years ago, I actually supervised a student who was in an undergrad program who was wanting to do research, and her final project was to come up with an annotated bibliography of this topic that she was interested in. So she read all his papers, summarized them in her own words in just a couple of sentences, and that helped her get an overview of what was available. Tracking direct quotes in your notes, this will help you be aware of plagiarism issues. So if you do like a direct quote, or you want to write it down, put it in quotes and put the page number next to it, so that you don't automatically think when you're writing up your literature review that what you have written down was in your own words, and you can quote it directly when you're putting it into your paper. And if you don't want to directly quote it, rephrase it in your own words once you see that it was a direct quote. Remaining aware of plagiarism and turn it in. This is a really important thing for Ashford students, because most of us, or hopefully all of us, do check your papers for plagiarism and think about what Turnitin will do. Submit it to Turnitin yourself before you send it to us. Block quotes are an issue with students, as Dr. Glenn says. Yes, if a quote is 40 words or longer, according to APA, it needs to be formatted as a block quote, and you can read the specifics in the manual. Basically, it means that you have to sort of offset the quote, indent it a few spaces more than the rest, and it goes out on its own with blank lines between it, so that you can see that it's been offset and it's not part of the actual paragraph. Paraphrasing, putting things in your own words, as I've said several times, is very important. Another common thing that I see when students are trying to follow APA is that you have to have the work cited in the text and in the references list. So if I see articles listed in the reference list, but I didn't see them cited within your paper, then that's actually not following APA, because you don't put things in the reference list in APA if they're not in the text. There are other citation formats that will allow you to do things like making a list of things for further reading, further direction. but that's not seen in APA. If you want to have like a works cited list, in other formats, there's a list cited list, and there's also a place for here's some things you can read if you're further interested, but I didn't cite them. That's a little bit different. And yes, Diane, Hamilton, we do see this frequently. Okay, so first it's discussion time, and apparently there's a phone ringing here. I'll just let that go. And what I'd like to do is bring up a couple of examples just for discussion of recent papers that I've published, and let me see if I can get the PDF up here correctly. If you don't see them here in just a minute, let me know. Okay, it's telling me the PDF file type is not supported for loading. Dr. Swanson, do you know where I'm at? I tried to load a PDF file of one of my articles, and when I tried to open it, it says that it doesn't support the PDF format for uploading. That's okay. I will just, if we can't find a way around this, I will just read from this just to give you an idea of how we've done this. So these are a couple of articles that I have written with former students of mine, and this one is one that I mentioned earlier. It's called Increasing Libraries' Content Findability on the Web with Search Engine Optimization. So what we were looking at was the idea of search engine optimization, which, if you're not familiar with what that means, it's a practice that is used on the internet for web development to get your pages to appear higher in the search results. So typically people don't look past the first page of a Google search when they are looking for information or searching for information on Google. People don't go into page 20 of the search results. They sort of look at the first page and move on if they didn't find what they wanted. So what the student was looking at was how do we increase the information that's available in public libraries, which is really very useful quite frequently in search results. But if people are searching for a topic, things that are available only through libraries will end up higher in the search results. And you can do a lot of manipulation with your website to make things come higher up. And so what we did here was in our literature review section, we started with sort of that citing several citations at once to sort of give a general overview of a summary of this many studies talked about general search engine optimization techniques. And so we sort of had two sections in our literature review, and this was fairly focused. One was on search engine optimization in general, just sort of what it is and what research has been done with it and what practice has been done with it. And then we went on to search engine optimization, specifically in libraries. And what we found was that there wasn't a whole lot of work at all done by search engine optimization for libraries other than people saying that maybe it needed to be done. And then from there we progressed into providing the theoretical framework that we used, and then the methodology, and then we went on to the results and the discussion and the conclusion, just as any original research paper would do. That's an interesting comment, Karen, about a comment in literature review, the development of a conversation between the authors you were using. That would be interesting if you could get all the authors together of a paper that you wrote and put them in the same room and maybe lock the door and see what happens at the end. That would actually be really fun, especially if you're providing a lot of contrasting views. The other paper that I was going to show you is one we did focus groups with groups of young people between the ages of 18 and 25 to ask them about their preferences for receiving mental health information online. And this is an important area of research for people who do work in health information, because a lot of people are afraid to go ask for help when they have concerns about their mental health. And so the idea is that if it's available online, they will be more likely to search online for it because they can do it sort of anonymously without having to admit to go to somebody immediately for help to find out about their concerns about their mental health. And so we spoke with some focus groups of people specifically between the ages of, I think we did between 12 and 25 for this group, and just asked them about social media and how they prefer to receive information online. And this was an area that had been almost nothing done. There's a lot of information from the health world about people not seeking mental health treatment because there's stigma associated with it. So we talked a lot about the stigma. We talked a lot about what is known about stigma, about the prevalence of mental health conditions in young people. And then we constructed themes on online credibility, which is how people determine whether or not a website is a credible source, because obviously credible and authoritative sources is an important area for health information, because you don't want to read the wrong stuff. You don't want to read the biased stuff. And so that was pretty much all we had to go on for this particular study, because nobody had looked at the possibility of using social media to reach people with mental health information, which is interesting because if you know anything about the support groups that are available online for different health conditions, people do it all the time by themselves, but they don't necessarily have any professionally created resources on social media for this. So in this case, we didn't really have a lot to use to focus on our topic because there hadn't been anything done. So we had to sort of come up with these two different areas that related and then basically state that we couldn't find anything else on this. And that was what made this particular research so interesting, was because we were doing something on a completely new topic area. But in that case, it's hard to get your literature review to look like it's focused on the topic when you're not building on existing research, because nobody has done this before. So that's what I was hoping to demonstrate with this paper. So now I just want to open it up for question and discussions. It's 2:45, so I guess we have another 15 minutes or so if you're able to stay till the top of the hour, whatever the top of the hour is, wherever you are today. So if you have any questions, or I've just put out there for discussion what you think makes an engaging literature review, because I've kind of talked about what I think, but I would like to hear from you as well. And if you have any other thoughts or any questions, please type them in chat. That issue of validation, Dr. Glenn, that you brought up is very interesting. The idea of validity and credibility and authority in social media is an important area in my research. And what we're finding is that people are finding social media content and using it regardless of the source. And this is not necessarily a good thing, but the issue is that they're going out and doing it and talking to each other no matter what. Some of the most extreme examples I've heard about in my research are, you know, if you're aware of like pro-anorexia sites or pro-suicide sites, I actually interviewed somebody once who said that their friend committed suicide because somebody on an online discussion forum told them it was a good idea to do so. And they did commit suicide based on that recommendation. There are sites where people support each other in anorexia, so they encourage each other to not eat. And so that's the issue, is how do we get organizations and people with good credibility, with valuable, valid resources and important authority to make social media content available and make sure that people find it. Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. The issue of the false sense of dependency. The problem is that what we're working against is that people are doing it whether or not we like it. And we can't necessarily stop what they're doing when they're searching for things in their pajamas at 3 in the morning, when they're worried about their health. So how do we work with that? How do we make it a better experience, a more reliable experience for people? And that's kind of where my research in this area falls, if that makes any sense. Anything on literature reviews, though, in general. That's good to hear, Mandy. Dr. Glenn. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Diane. Hamilton. Thank you, Dr. Katie. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Leah. I really appreciate that. Well, if we don't have anything else, as there are no final questions or comments, I really appreciate your attending my session today, and Dr. Swanson and I are doing some more of these sessions, both in March and in April, and I hope this continues to be an ongoing thing because I really think it's beneficial, and I have fun giving them. So if you would please, if you get notifications of future sessions, please announce them to your students and post them in your classes if you're willing to do so, so that we can continue to get more students to join this, because I really think that students can benefit from these tutorials. So thanks again, and I hope to see you. I think I'm doing another one next week, I believe. So I hope to see you then.